It's definitely part of the process, and it doesn't stop there. You kind of go through that guilt, the grief, the relief. There's so many emotions that you go through, I think, when you get that first diagnosis, at least for your first child, perhaps. And I also think there was an element of sadness, knowing that we would have a different journey ahead to anyone with a neurotypical child, knowing that it's going to come with a lot of challenges and it's going to be a bumpy ride ahead through childhood, but also the adolescence and a young adult.
Welcome to All Aboard, where we help parents navigate the ADHD journey. I'm Claire, and today we'll be talking to parent guest Hannah Hampton. Hannah is an interior designer and founder of interior design practice Ottersam Design. Her beautiful southwest London home, Hampton House, is an Instagram favourite and has featured in The Times, Homes and Gardens, Sheer Luxe and Ideal Home. She lives with her husband, 3 amazing girls, 2 of which have ADHD, and their little dog Monty. Instagram gives us a peek into Hannah's stunning home, but as is often the case with social media, it's easy to forget there is a real person behind the beautiful images. Hannah is here with us today to share her story as the mum of 2 daughters with ADHD. This is a very special episode for me because Hannah is also one of my very best friends in the whole world. We met in our late teens and have been friends for over 25 years. She is godmother to my son with ADHD, and I also have the honour of being godmother to her eldest daughter who has ADHD too. I'm very lucky to have her in my life and now on my podcast. Welcome aboard, Han.
Hello, Claire. Lovely to be here.
Thank you for being here. So can you briefly introduce yourself and your children with ADHD and tell us a bit about your family?
Yeah, sure. So there's 5 of us in our family. There's my husband, myself, and our 3 girls who are 12, 10 and 7. And my eldest 2 girls have both been diagnosed with ADHD. And it's really interesting as they have very different personalities and very different ADHD profile types. My eldest, she's a 12-year-old. She has ADHD, but very much of the combined type. She's really hyperactive, really impulsive, super chatty, super social. So she has that kind of, combined hyperactive type that's typically actually associated with boys, but she is definitely of that type. And she also has dyslexia. I would say in a summary, she kind of externalizes her energy and it all comes out in a very noisy, fun, loving, loud, messy way. Whereas my middle daughter, she has ADHD, but it's more of the inattentive type. And she struggles with focus, but it's not so much the inattentiveness. With her, I think it's more of the emotional regulation. She is extremely insecure, really sensitive, sometimes has that low self-esteem issue, although you'd never see that necessarily when you first meet her. And I understand that can sometimes come as a result of masking ADHD for so long. She has also had in the past a little trouble expressing herself and has a tendency to say exactly what she's thinking, although she is getting much better at that. For example, when she's bored or tired, she makes sure that everyone knows about it. And it doesn't matter even if we're in a really big group, where sometimes children, if there's other adults around where people they don't know very well, sometimes children are a little bit shyer and quieter and they a little bit more restrained. Whereas my middle daughter, that doesn't bother her at all. And she wants to go home or she's bored and we're at someone's house, she will say that. And she's not embarrassed to say it. Although I do think afterwards when she reflects back, she kind of says, sorry, mummy, I probably shouldn't have said it in that way. So, but she just has these emotions that are inside her and she doesn't know almost how to cope with them and it all just blurts out. So I think where my eldest daughter, externalizes it with her energy and her emotions, my middle daughter internalizes her anxieties and worries. But then it builds up with her so much that it comes out in a way that's a little bit rude. Even though she's not trying to be rude, it's just not knowing really how to express herself or communicate her. But that build-up is so intense, it just needs releasing.
I'm smiling when you say that because I'm thinking about my own daughter because that's exactly what she's like. So, and I'm sure lots of people listening can recognise that most definitely. Where you're like, trying to kind of cover up in a social perspective and they're like, nope, this is what's on my mind. This is how I feel. And I'm going to be very direct in expressing it. So I'm sure not alone.
Absolutely, and you gotta respect them for that. You kind of love them for that because they just say it how it is. But it's it's probably worse for us as parents because we're so our children are polite and yes they'll follow certain social rules, and then they just come out with these corkers and you're like, oh, okay. And then you try and make it up, or just try and ease the situation, or talk around how she's probably just a bit tired today, and I'm really sorry. But no, that's just that's just her. Although I have to say, in all fairness to her, she is definitely getting better at it, and there are some mechanisms that we've put in place to try and overcome those situations, so that she can communicate something to me in a more perhaps socially accepting way for everybody else. But she can do that for me, and we understand each other, and we've got these little signs that we do to each other. So we are getting better at that, and that's something we've recognised as a
Oh,
family.
that's amazing. So you might not want to share the signs because they might be secret. So that if you're in that social situation, but maybe that's a conversation for later. I think, oh, I should adopt those. That's a really good idea. Because in one sense, this honesty is kind of beautifully refreshing, and you don't want to crush that. There's real strength in it, but it's, I guess, when you grow up, it's learning how to use it. So yeah, signs is a good idea.
The signs we have, and it's very discreet, is that she comes over to me and she says, "Mummy," and I'm like, "Yeah." And sometimes, and this is something else I was going to chat about later, is the ADHD child tends to interrupt quite a lot when you're in the middle of a conversation. They want your attention and they want it now. Um, so we've spoken about that, but so typically I'm talking to someone and she'll come up and say, "Mummy," and then I try to say, "Yeah, just one moment, I'm just going to finish this conversation." And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But anyway, what she does, and this is the sign, is that she'll get my hand and she'll squeeze it really hard, so that she's trying to tell me that she perhaps feels uncomfortable, or she's ready to go, or there's something she wants to tell me quietly in private, or because we've been talking about the fact that perhaps don't blurt out exactly how you're feeling in front of everyone. And then what I do is I squeeze her hand back to say that I've heard it. I know I'm just going to be, just give me like maybe count to 30 seconds, just so I can quickly finish up or wrap up the conversation with the adult, and then I can turn my full attention to them.
That's really lovely. I'm going to adopt that. I think that is a very, very good idea because, as you say, it's the thing of them being heard and that I'm here, I'm coming. So you obviously have three children, two of them, your eldest and your middle daughter, as you said, have got ADHD and both present quite differently. So what were the early signs and behaviours that made you suspect that your child or both your children might have ADHD?
So for my eldest, looking back, I feel it was much more obvious. Obvious now, when you look back at reflections. From a toddler, she had bounds of energy, and she was brilliant, and she would always be running. And I always remember our friends would say, "My eldest, she never really walks, does she? She always runs." And I'm like, "Yeah, actually, you're right." And I would take her along, as you do when you've got these lovely firstborn children, and you take them onto all these music groups and toddler groups, and you think they're just going to be wonderful, and they are. But I always remember with my eldest, all these toddlers sitting around in a group with their little musical instrument, tapping, tap, 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 or following really avidly listening to the teacher and following her cues. And my eldest, instead of doing that, and she'd be the only one, she'd be trying to pull over the stack of chairs in the corner, or trying to open the door that the teacher had locked, so no one could possibly escape, or just basically anything but sitting in the circle on my lap, tapping their little musical instrument. And and looking back now, I'm just like, yep, that's her, and that's still her now. She would probably do anything other than, that calm activity that we're all supposed to be doing as parents with these lovely newborn children. And when she was about 2, or probably to 5, really, it was a range, I'd say 2 to 5 years old, she would have this wonderful ability to tear up all her books. So you'd leave her at bedtime and in her cot or in her new bed if she was slightly older, and you'd leave her with a couple of books. You say goodnight, you'd leave her with a couple of books to read, flick through, and then you come back to check on them, and she's asleep at this point, but her books are all just torn up, or defaced in some way. So whether they've been cut or coloured all over. And she wouldn't just do that with books, she would do it with toys, with furniture, with Barbie. She'd always cut their hair. And even now, dare I say it, on her desk, this was probably about, and she's 12 years old now, on her desk in her bedroom, I walked into her room and I was like, oh my goodness, what have you done? And she had drawn all over her desk, which is a lovely painted desk in her room, but she had not only drawn on it, she's got like the pen or like almost like a compass, the nib of a compass, and scratched in, almost like graffiti, all her name everywhere. And I went, oh, here we go. Yeah, and take some breaths. And she'd got her nail varnish and she'd put nail varnish everywhere. And she'd also drawn all over her light socket, the electrical sockets. Not in a dangerous way, it wasn't liquid, but it was just, she just has to doodle on every surface. And even from a toddler up until now, we always say, darling, we love the fact that you do arts and crafts. It's brilliant. Your creativity is unreal. She's a brilliant illustrator. But please just do it on paper and card. Please, it'll save us a fortune. We're trying to fix everything. Even in our car, we've got a seat where they have the seats that come up and back in the boot. And this was probably a few years ago, it was maybe a couple of years ago. I was in there just giving a clean out, and I've seen again how she's graffitied her initials in the side of in the car in that leather. And I'm like, oh yeah, great. That's probably taken a bit of a chunk of the price of the car down. I'd say, darling, is this you? And she'd go, no. And I'm like, but darling, you're the only one with those initials in the family. I'm not sure the others would. And she was like, and then you just see her face go like, I can't get out of this. I'm sorry, mummy. I'm like, okay. And you take deep breaths. So anyway, like I said, there were lots of signs. Looking back, the other thing that she would do, which is typical for ADHD, now knowing what I know, is that she would always talk a lot. She's an absolute chatterbox. She would always interrupt when you're talking about something, any conversation, she'd interrupt it, whether I was talking to her or whether I was talking to someone else. And typically quite often really, the thing that she would interrupt with would be something that's completely off topic. So, we have no link to the conversation. She would always she's very loud. She was quite childish in her behaviour, which I know sounds silly when she's a child, but compared to others of her peer group and her age group, she was always seemed the most immature. And that was really apparent when we started to do play dates, when she started at school, and you'd have play dates all over and you'd get these children who were perhaps, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you're going up into those kind of like slightly older years in the primary school. And you'd have this conversation with these other children and they're like, wow, this is like talking to a mini adult. They're so engaging and they're listening and they've got an opinion about something. And so just getting that sense of how much further behind she was, I guess, in her maturity was another sign, another factor. And she also would, and I feel like I'm painting a very negative picture. I'm not. She's a wonderful, wonderful child, but I just wanted to give you the signs that I noticed. She would typically scream and shout quite a lot. She's very loud. She would, every morning when we're trying to get ready for school, and she still does this now, she sings like an opera singer, which is quite hard in itself because I understand she needs to externalise this energy that she has, and that's one of the ways it comes out, and I get that she needs to do that. But when you're obviously trying to direct and instruct two other children as to what they need to do to get ready in the morning, and you've also trying to think about yourself, you've got to get yourself ready for work. To have an opera singer constantly singing at 7 a.m, it's quite exhausting. And I laugh about it now, but at the time it's quite stressful. And so I really try and ask her not to do that, and to use her quieter voice if she wants to do that. But it's this externalization of all this energy that comes out. Another sign was lack of eye contact. I quickly learned when they were little to get down at their level, to say to them, look at me in the eye when I talk to them. But I remember again with my eldest, she'd open her eyes so wide to really try and concentrate on focusing on my eyes. But then you could see her, she just couldn't help herself but to look away. And she just couldn't hold my eye contact for, I would say, probably more than 2 or 3 seconds. And she had to look away. She had to know what was going on around her. And couldn't focus on me. Another incident, which I will never forget, was one of our first au pairs. We had a wonderful Spanish girl, and I had just had my youngest who's now 7, and I was sat on the sofa breastfeeding her. And a wonderful au pair came up to me and said very calmly, "Hannah, she is just out of control." And I think that was the realization for me that perhaps this isn't something that she's just going to grow out of, or maybe this isn't the typical behaviour of the 6-year-old compared to perhaps those other ones in her class that I would see, or her friends outside of school. And that was like a bit of a bomb going off in my mind, and a real wake-up moment, I think, to say maybe I should start thinking about all these little things that she does. Maybe it's not just that my eldest is full of energy. Maybe there's something else. And I think, Claire, this is where you came in, because you were obviously going through something similar with your son. And hearing you talk about your journey, bearing in mind that he's a year older, hearing you talk about your journey and everything that you were talking about with where you had perhaps struggles, or what you were trying to face or having to face every day when you were just trying to parent him, made me think, actually, maybe this is something that, my eldest is struggling with too. So that was when I started to look at ADHD. So when my eldest was in year 1, I went to school, and it was at parents' evening, and this was all starting to kind of like come to surface for me. I was thinking about this quite a lot now, and I starting to do a little bit of research, just touching the surface on ADHD, but starting to look at it. They usually wait for the child to be a little bit older before they do the assessments. And so I probably did put them on the spot, and they were very sweet. And they said, "I'm not sure, perhaps, maybe." They basically danced around the issue. They did say that my eldest struggled at school, and she did perhaps struggle with a little bit of attention at times. And she was often the clown in the class. So she was always trying to make everyone laugh and have fun, which is everything that she's about. And I love her for that. But obviously, when it comes down to schoolwork and trying to help her contain that energy, basically, and apply it in a really good way rather than just bounding around the walls, it just made me really think about what we need to do. So when I left the parents' evening, they obviously didn't give me the answer. It was a definite yes or no, and I wouldn't expect them to, but I was just looking for signs. They gave me some information that she did struggle with the focus, and that she was, like I said, acting like this clown in the classroom. But it made me think about it, and the more that I researched into ADHD, and I was listening to your story, Claire, I was pretty certain that she had it, bearing in mind that I didn't know very much, but I was pretty certain that this was going to be the journey that we were going on.
So that's your eldest, and your middle daughter also has ADHD. So what were the early signs and behaviours for her? I'm guessing they're different because she presents differently, or did you recognise similar patterns?
For my middle daughter, it was a very different story. She's not hyperactive. There was no impulsiveness. And when you read about ADHD, certainly when I was looking at this 6-7 years ago, and obviously there's so much more information about it now, I feel like we've come a long way just in these last few years. It was tended to read more about the hyperactivity ADHD, or at least that was the information I was getting. So I was a bit uncertain, but I knew that there was some sort of neurodivergent trait within her. I just couldn't figure out what it was, because she was so different to my eldest. And that's how, in my mind, I was like, well, that's ADHD. And I've since learned that there are so many different traits and profiles and characteristics and qualities, however you want to put it, of ADHD, that doesn't just come in one shape or size. And also, my middle daughter, she was doing quite well at school in the first few years. She's not dyslexic. Her reading was great. She was engaging in reading. Her handwriting was great. So academically, there wasn't an obvious struggle. But what was apparent, very apparent, were emotional issues and that emotional regulation. So like I was talking about earlier on, just these, I think the intensity of trying to hold things in, these anxieties and worries for so long within her, because I think she internalized it, and then it all would come out. And then when it does come out, my goodness, it came out, and it came out in a proper emotional outburst. I remember that other parents at nursery would always call her spirited, which was probably a really polite way of saying we actually think your daughter's really naughty. And she would say what she thinks, as I said earlier. But I think that was just about not knowing how to express herself, as I mentioned. My middle daughter would also have quite an issue with the word no. Now, I know a lot of children do, and that is not unusual. But I felt it was, to an extent, that was not normal, I guess, and not usual. And also compared to another level, to my eldest, who would also struggle with the word no, but she'd eventually come around to it. With my middle daughter, she would, if she didn't want to do something, she would have an absolute meltdown, and not give up with it. And I'm talking like a good 30 minutes, 40 minutes, sometimes an hour, sometimes over an hour of upset and anger at us for making her do something that she didn't want to do. And she just couldn't understand why we would make her do something. It was like we were asking her to do something that was completely impossible, or in her mind, so unfair. And she would continue with that way until she either got what she wanted, which sometimes through pure exhaustion with us, she ended up getting what she wanted, or until she just got tired. However, that grudge and annoyance about that situation would last all day. And when she was little, I always remember saying to my husband, please don't upset her in the morning. Please, let's just try and make this day a really good day. Otherwise, I know we'd have to write off the whole day. Because she would not let it go. She wouldn't forgive us for not letting her have whatever she wanted, or to do something that she didn't want to do. For example, she hates going for a walk. She's never been a walker. So we would like to go out for a nice Sunday afternoon walk or Saturday afternoon walk. And she would be like, no, I absolutely do not want to go. And we're like, no, it's a nice family walk. We're going to do this all together. It's only going to be for like half an hour, an hour. It's not going to be for long. It's not going to, talking hikes here. We're just going to go for a walk around the park or the common, and we'll go to the playground. And she would come with us, but she would moan the entire way around. And she would make sure that everybody she saw, whether it was us, strangers, family, friends, she did not want to go on that walk. And she would just sit down and not move until we carried her, or she would very dramatically act out an injury, so that all of a sudden her knee would be in the most acute pain, and we'd have to turn around and go back. And then what she would do, though, and fair play to her, because it's quite, this is quite good. She would make sure that injury would then last the whole weekend. So even when we're back to the house, and she's acted out this very onset injury of a really bad knee, which hurts incredibly, clearly. It wasn't just when we got back to the house and then it was all fine. She would make sure that injury would last the whole weekend. So we knew what we did to her by making her go on that walk. And it's that kind of emotional regulation, and just, the energy that must consume just by acting that out, from her point of view, just must be exhausting. But she wouldn't let it go. And so I think from all of those kind of situations, and examples and scenarios, and there'd be, perhaps a few friendship issues here and there, I knew that she struggled with her emotion and her regularity of it, or regulation of it. So that was what made us go and look at our middle daughter and think, okay, I'm not sure what it is, I'm not sure how it is, but I think there's something up that we need to go and explore.
These stories are funny, aren't they, now, when you smile, because you can look back and you can say them, but they're obviously very stressful. They're really difficult. They have a massive impact on the child and your family, but they are really helpful because there will be so many people listening to this who really recognise this stuff, whether they have a diagnosis or are thinking about it. So from all of those symptoms, like when and how were the girls diagnosed, and what were your initial thoughts and feelings about that?
So I'll continue with my middle, actually, just as we were talking about her. Because of my eldest, I was reading more about ADHD. And I was very aware of my middle daughter, something going on. And I read this amazing book called Attention Girls by Patricia Quinn. I think she's an American lady. And it's actually a book for girls about their ADHD. So I bought it thinking about my eldest daughter, thinking that, and I think at this point she had been diagnosed, which I'll come back to, thinking that when we do get around to talking to her about it, I wanted to read this book and think how she can read about it herself as well. So it's a book that the girls, it focuses on ADHD and girls, and it's a book which the girls themselves would read and explain everything about their ADHD to them. And it's a really good book. But the thing that I took from it, which I thought was brilliant, is that it talks about all these different types of profiles and how ADHD manifests itself in different individuals. And there was this one particular profile when I was reading it one night in bed, and it was just that light bulb moment. I was like, oh my God, this is my middle daughter. This is her. And it would talk about a girl with ADHD who would cry all the time. She would get embarrassed very easily and hurt and offended if you were to tease her. She thinks that her friends are perhaps talking about her behind her back all the time when that's not true. So she's incredibly sensitive and insecure. She doesn't want to cry, but it just comes out of her. And she just, after trying to keep it in for so long, she would get angry and she'd throw tantrums when frustrated or doesn't get her own way. And the way that Patricia Quinn describes them in the book is that they're hyper-reactive and impulsive as opposed to hyperactive, because she just doesn't know how to use her words to describe how she's feeling. And I was like, yes, that is my middle daughter. That is her. And for me, that was a real moment of, okay, I think I know what it is now. Maybe it's this, without wishing to diagnose it myself, because I'm clearly not able to. But I was like, maybe this is what it is. Maybe she does have ADHD too, but in a completely different way. And so what I did is got in contact with my eldest educational psychologist and the school, obviously, and my eldest psychiatrist, and just started to get some assessments booked in and get their feedback and their thoughts as to perhaps how my middle child is doing and if it is something that we need to pay more attention to. And so we spoke to school and they were like, yep, academically, she's doing really well. She's a bright girl. There are signs of inattentiveness and perhaps lack of focus and fidgety, but not to the extent that I saw with my eldest. But we did book those appointments. And so first off, we went to see first off, we saw the psychiatrist, which is an unusual way of doing it, but it's only because I had a contact with my eldest. I chatted with him first and just wanted to get his thoughts. And my middle daughter came in with me and we had the appointment together. And his conclusion after, and it was a very short and sharp meeting, but after that time, so it wasn't the full-on assessment. If he was to offer any guidance at that point, he was saying, I think borderline ADHD, like maybe, let's do the assessments anyway. And then but what he did say, which I thought was really interesting, is that he thinks that my middle daughter has separation anxiety with me, which is why she really struggles when I give attention to other parents or other children or whoever it is. If I don't give her my full attention, she struggles with that. And that was really interesting. So that really made me think differently to my middle daughter, because I know that she needs me that little bit more in a different way than perhaps the other two. And I need to respect that and manage that, because she's always been a very tactile girl. She needs that touch, the hugs, that physical reassurance that we love her so much. Whereas the other two don't need that. And I'm very mindful of that. So every bedtime with my middle daughter just takes that little bit longer to be able to walk away from her, because we always have to go back in for that one last hug, that one last kiss for nighttime. And I get that, and I respect her for that, and I respect the situation. And we're probably, that's not going to change in the immediate future. And we just need to ride that out until she's ready. So after this information with the psychiatrist, we booked the appointment with the educational psychologist and got the feedback from schools, and we filled in all the questionnaires and reports and gave them all the reports that they wanted. And my middle daughter went in and spent some time with them and did lots of screening. And the results were that she did have ADHD, but it wasn't combined. Like my eldest, it was very much on the inattentive version, and talked a lot about the emotional regulation, which is what I was explaining before. And with my middle daughter, it wasn't so much of that perhaps shock factor that I had with my eldest, because I'd been through this journey before, albeit in a slightly different route. But what I think we did when we got the diagnosis is that we really spent a bit of time actually talking to the educational psychologist about how we can support her, given that I feel that she was almost more vulnerable because it was more about her emotions and how she felt about herself and her esteem. And we wanted to understand how we could support her in that way, rather than perhaps trying to manage the hyperactivity that we have in our eldest. So it was kind of like we were trying to treat her in a different way as we did with my eldest. With my eldest, it was May 2020 when she was officially diagnosed with both ADHD and dyslexia. So it was during COVID, and she was in year 3 and she was 8 years old. At first, I think I felt relief because we knew what was going on and we had an answer as to her behaviours. So we knew what we were dealing with and could hopefully support her in the best way moving forward. But I did also feel incredible guilt because she was the first one diagnosed for me. I felt real guilt that I had done something wrong, either during my pregnancy or during those first few newborn months, because I think it's natural as a mother to blame yourself. And I know now that that's not the case. You know, it's not something that is done. It's something that the way that the brain is wired, and it's out of your control. But nonetheless, I think as mums, we do blame ourselves, and I think it's really important to you almost have to go through that process to ride through that journey, and then you come out of it the other end knowing that it's okay. I can deal with this. It's going to be fine, and it's not me. I haven't done anything wrong.
That's such an important message, I think, for parents, just to briefly interrupt you there, because it is not parenting that causes ADHD, but I think that feeling is one that is shared universally by parents. Certainly, I know I felt like that, certainly anyone I've ever spoken to. It really is hard. There is that guilt. And then it's almost part of the process. It's something that you have to work through, a bit like a grief, I suppose, before you then are able to sort of come out the other side and then start the more proactive support and interventions.
No, absolutely. It's definitely part of the process, and it doesn't stop there. You kind of go through that guilt, the grief, the relief. There's so many emotions that you go through, I think, when you get that first diagnosis, at least for your first child, perhaps. And I also think there was an element of sadness, knowing that we would have a different journey ahead to anyone with a neurotypical child, knowing that it's going to come with a lot of challenges and it's going to be a bumpy ride ahead through childhood, but also the adolescence and a young adult. And I would worry sometimes about how she would be able to cope as a young adult with the pressures of life ahead, and how she would be able to grow into a responsible, organised, independent adult. And sometimes I still worry about that now, but then there are moments of just joy when I see her being so brilliant. And I'm like, do you know what? She's going to be okay. But I think you'll always worry. And my mum always tells me that she worries about me now, and I'm much older. So I think as a parent, you always worry about your child. But I guess you can only put them on their path, and you've just got to support them in as many ways as you can and facilitate their childhood so that you have given them all the support mechanisms to kind of enter into adulthood. And then you've got to release them and let them go. And you'll always obviously be there for them, but there's only so much you can do. We got the ADHD diagnosis, and I have to say the label never bothered me. And I know some people really have a problem with that. I genuinely don't. And I will talk quite openly to people about my eldest's ADHD because she was, the first one diagnosed with it. And although I did feel terrible guilt sometimes because I'll be talking to people about it because I was still processing it. And I think I was going through that journey of processing it myself. So everything we were just talking about earlier, where it's like the guilt, the sadness, the relief, all these different emotions. And also I felt that I needed to do lots more research as to what it was, what it meant. I needed to be able to be more equipped in the knowledge and about what ADHD was before I could then go to her and say and have that conversation with her about what it is and how it's going to affect her, and so I can answer her questions. So I did feel guilty that there was a time difference with me almost talking to her about it because I needed to, very selfishly, almost process it myself, and I needed my friends for that. And then there was a timeline between that and telling her that this is what it was that happened. And actually, as it happened, my poor daughter, she got diagnosed probably about 6 months later with celiac disease, which is a whole nother topic. So she's had a gluten-free diet, and we had to tell her that immediately because obviously that impacts her daily diet about what she can and can't eat. And so we had a whole conversation about this. with her, and bless her, she was really upset about being different to everybody else. And when she'd go to birthday parties, she couldn't eat the birthday cake, or if the parent perhaps forgotten, because we all have busy lives, to get the gluten-free pizza in, so she was there and she wouldn't be able to have any food at the party. And so she hated being different and having to go to the diet table at lunchtime at school and having these meals, which quite frankly she never really liked. She hated being different, so we're having to almost navigate that journey, and that kind of put a delay in the point of us being able to tell her about the ADHD, because at that point she was like, "I'm different, mummy. I'm celiac. I don't like this." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I've got to tell you about ADHD as well." So I let her process the celiac disease first, and we kind of got our way through that, and then after a little while, we told her about the ADHD, and it was quite timely actually. So school were brilliant. They were running a neurodiversity week, and they would talk about all the different types of neurodiversity, and they would talk about it to all the children for the whole week, and it would be this like good big celebration about neurodiversity. And she was like, "Mummy, I think I've got ADHD." And I was like, "Oh, brilliant! This is a perfect segue. Let's have a chat." And actually came about with that because at this point she had processed her celiac. I had done my research on ADHD. I felt more equipped to talk to her about it. And then we had the conversation. And do you know what? She was absolutely fine about it. Because I think thanks to this week at school, she understood more about it. And then there were other children going around, "Oh, I think I've got it, and I think I've got it." And it was almost, it was fine. It wasn't this big deal that I was probably anticipating, of it being this big sit down and this big event. It was actually all okay. And I'm really grateful for the school to kind of creating that opportunity for us to talk about it. When we got the diagnosis for my eldest, we spoke to the psychiatrist about different interventions that we can take, and one of which was obviously medication. Given that she had such a hyperactive profile, my husband and I quite quickly made the decision that we were going to try medication, and we were reassured that it was medication which would help her for the day and it would leave her system. So it wasn't a build up. There weren't any long-term side effects. It was quite a good option, I suppose, that you could try, and then if it didn't work, you could very easily stop. So we tried it, and with my eldest, it was like night and day for us. You could literally see the medication kick in after 20 minutes, and we would we would count down. We'd be like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yep, there she is. Hi, sensible girl. And she would be calmer. She would be more in control. And we talk about it now with her. I'm like, "How do you feel when you have your medication?" Because she's 12 and she knows that that's why she takes the medication now. When at first we didn't explain why, outside of the fact that we would just call it her sprinkle medication, because when we opened the capsule, it was like all these little balls and inside, and we'd sprinkle it on some yogurt, and we'd say to her, "It's your sprinkle medication, and we just take it so that it slows your brain down a little bit and just helps you concentrate." And so we'd call it a sprinkle concentration medication, and she'd have it every day on yogurt. And then when we explained, and we had the ADHD chat with her, we would ask her, we're like, "When you take your medication now, how do you feel?" And she says, "Mummy, I just feel calmer and more in control, and I'm able to focus at school more and actually listen to the teacher." And so she gets it now. She understands why she takes it. She is definitely less physical when she takes her medication, and it just calms her whole body down. And I think she sees the value in that, as well as us as a family seeing the value in that, because what would happen when all the children were slightly younger and my eldest wasn't on medication, she would get so excited in the morning. She'd be opera singing, running around the island a dozen times when we're trying to get her to eat her breakfast. The dog's barking. She's got one sock on, one sock off. This whole kind of chaotic morning of trying to get them to school, and then that would almost stir the other two up. So they would also act almost in a similar way, because it was just a really fun, loud, messy morning. And obviously trying to get them out of the house to school by 8 o'clock, that would make that difficult. So if my eldest had her medication, everything would just be calmer. The whole family would be calmer. which is probably a terrible thing to say in the sense that, are we medicating my eldest so that we had a calmer family life? But the reality of it was probably, yes, we were, because it helped not only her, but it helped the whole family dynamic. And it was just a happier environment when everyone's a little bit calmer. The only other thing I wanted to say on medication is that obviously it doesn't fit everybody. No one size fits all, and if it's not for you, then that's fine. And equally, if it is for you, then brilliant. I think it's a very personal decision. Don't let anyone judge you for it again. So don't worry. People are always going to judge you whether you do or don't, but you just got to try and rise above it and don't let it get to you.
Thank you for saying that. I think it's very important, and it's very brave of you to mention that and to talk about it so honestly. My son's medicated, and I often describe it as putting on like a pair of glasses. It's not a fix for everything. We still need to build the skills and the particularly as they grow up and they're developing, to be able to manage their ADHD, understand it, cope with it, live with it. But it really does level the playing field. Certainly, I see that in an academic sense, in the ability to just be in a classroom and function in a classroom, as well as all of the other benefits that it can have. It's a very personal one, because certain medications will work for some and not for others. And there is a huge degree of trial and error, and many won't want to or feel that they need to go down that path. But for people who do take medication, as you described it, the night and day, it can be life-changing. And I think it's really valuable to share that for other parents that are either have children who take medication or are in that process of deliberating and trying to weigh it up. So thank you. So and you've touched on this quite a bit in terms of their learning differences, but what accommodations and support have you found beneficial educationally for them kind of post-diagnosis?
So my eldest really did struggle with the core subjects. She really struggled with English and maths. And the first piece of extra support was the Lexia app to help her with English. So that was specifically for phonics and spellings, the formation of words, things like that. This was in year 2. So she was about 7, I think. And it wasn't until she was in year 3 that we were talking about that possible dyslexia diagnosis. And I hadn't realised that when we were given the Lexia app, it's probably called Lexia because there's a connection with dyslexia. And I was like, oh, yes, of course. I hadn't quite made that connection. So anyway, they had given her the Lexia app, and that was great because whilst it is on an iPad, so it's not ideal because of screen time, but it was brilliant because it really helped her with the phonics, which is essentially what she struggled with at that age group. And school were great in supporting us overall with the journey of getting my eldest diagnosed, and my middle one for that matter, discussing the process, telling us who to talk to, where to get additional information, filling in all the reports and the forms that they need to also send off to the educational psychologist, just as we did. They also moved my eldest to the front of the class. They gave her fidget toys. We also found out about that time that my eldest needed glasses because, bless her, as it became apparent, I think she was really struggling to see the screen, but we hadn't quite appreciated to what extent. And so she needed glasses, and that really helped. So they helped us with that. Both of the girls were lucky enough to access counselling at school, which has been a fantastic support for them, as they both developed very trusting relationships with their counsellors, enabling them to talk very freely about how they were feeling. And they did this through conversation or through play. And the counsellors would give them tools to help them navigate any difficulties. My middle daughter saw the counsellor once a week for about a year, and she helped her navigate her emotions no end and express herself better and really help navigate those friendships. Just by something simple, by trying to help her say or tell someone if they were hurting her feelings, she was able to tell them this in a calm way, using words rather than getting really upset about it all and having an emotional outburst or just crying and being really unconsolable. And for my eldest daughter, the counsellor also helped her in gaining confidence, in belief, recognising that she has differences perhaps here and there, but knowing that it's okay, and that, every person is different and every person has their own struggles. And that really helps them, both of them. and having access to that at school, I feel very lucky to have that.
That's phenomenal.
As I mentioned previously, my eldest was diagnosed during year 3, but that was when we were in the midst of homeschooling with COVID. So I got to learn a lot about my daughter, and getting her to really try and concentrate with her schoolwork firsthand. And it was a really trying time for all of us because we, as a family, were in the middle of a major house renovation. We were homeschooling 3 children, and we'd received this diagnosis of ADHD and dyslexia. But school were really supportive in that as well. So they were very understanding of the situation, and they would make sure that she had a bit of one-on-one time with her teacher at some point during the week so that she was able to try and catch up or have extra support in some way if she didn't understand some new concepts that were coming through, for example, in maths. So they've been very accommodating.
It's interesting, the COVID point. I think that might be something that resonates with people too. It definitely does with me. COVID was an exceptionally difficult time for us as a family. But in some ways, when I look back now, one benefit of it was the fact that there was almost this stop point, this hard stop in the middle of, if I looked at my son, for an example, it was a really, really difficult time for him. And actually, I think he has probably benefited significantly from that. He was in year 4 at the time. A stop in the middle of that school year with all the social issues and all the challenges that he was having, almost the respite at home. And then similarly to your eldest, when there was the kind of second wave and children were being homeschooled again because of his neurodiversity, he was then back in the classroom. But suddenly he was getting, it's just a very small classroom size at that point versus the 30 kids he would normally have been with. And it is sort of, I want to say, the silver lining to what was a very grey cloud. I think there is benefit to that, and you being able to spend that time with them and actually see how they learn firsthand, whilst not easy and massively stressful, actually has gone on to probably have quite positive impacts on them.
Yeah, I think so. I just remember thinking it was so useful to see her try to concentrate and really see how much she struggled, and to see that firsthand. I always remember trying to teach her the time, which I don't think any parent should try to teach their child. Like like parents shouldn't teach children how to drive.
Too stressful.
It just shouldn't happen. It's way too stressful. And bless her, that was just a concept that was not going in. And probably what's she in now? She's in year 7. I think she probably got it eventually at the end of year 5, and we were trying to teach it to her in year 3. Wow, that was hard. Very stressful at the time, but I can absolutely laugh about it now. My eldest is super creative. So while she did struggle on those subjects that I was talking about a moment ago, her favourite subjects, unsurprisingly, are DT and art. And we are so proud of her because she's been working towards an art scholarship. And that's so good to see because she's an incredible artist. And it's definitely her version of super focusing and that hyper focusing. So even just yesterday, she got this huge canvas for Christmas, and she must have spent 2 or 3 hours just painting on it without any interruption. She had her apron on. She was in the zone, and she was happy and content, and she was just doing something she loves, and that was so nice to see.
That really is so nice to see, isn't it? Because I think, as is often the case as parents, we're focused on the challenges and the kind of very real impairments that this brings to family life and their life every single day. But it's really nice to hear the positive, because there really are so many positives with this neurodiversity with ADHD. So can you share a success story or a memorable moment or unique strength that have made you proud as a parent of 2 children with ADHD?
Yes. With my eldest, as I was just saying, being asked to go onto the art scholarship program was just wonderful. So proud of her for that. Always getting, and this is post medication, which I can touch on in a second, the best effort grades in her school reports. So while she perhaps wouldn't quite get there on the attainment, or she was doing fine on the attainment, which is amazing, she would always get the best effort marks. And that, I think, is all you can ask for in a child. Um, and I'm just so proud of her that no matter all these difficulties and challenges she has in trying to concentrate and focus on one thing, because she does get so easily distracted, she works really hard at school. Always saying my eldest helps smaller children when they're struggling with something, or if they need support. She's always straight in there to help them. She's ever such a sweet girl. When she can't have that birthday cake, like I mentioned at the party, because it's not gluten free, she just stands there and goes up to the parent and goes, "It's okay, don't worry, I understand," because she doesn't want to upset the birthday girl or the parent. Now, and she understands it, and she's very brave about it, and she's accepting of the situation, which just makes me filled with pride. And also just her ability to be creative. Even the other day, she was like, "Mummy, it's amazing how much fun you can have out of really boring everyday things." And with that, I think she just, she'll just find something around the house and make something out of it, and she'll do that happily in a very content way for hours.
Oh, that's amazing. And how about your middle daughter? What kind of successes or unique strengths do you think about for her?
With my middle daughter, she is very able in gymnastics, and she competes quite a bit with gymnastics. And that's brilliant to see because, again, when she is focused in that, she does really well and she's so strong, and she loves it. She also, and I don't know where this came from, has quite a musical trait, and she's passed her grade one piano exam with flying colours recently, and she's now working towards her grade two exam. And she's in the school choir. And again, she gets really, really good marks on the effort in her school reports, which I think is so important. I also really see her just trying to take deep breaths at school and managing her emotions and trying to control herself rather than letting it all out. And it's important that she does let it all out. You can't contain these things, but I can see her trying to use tools that perhaps we've spoken about to try and just go, okay, I just need to take some deep breaths or walk away from the situation. I need to try and calm myself down and regulate my emotions, and then I can walk back into the situation. And I can really see her trying to do that. Um, and that for her makes me very proud.
And I think offers such hope, doesn't it? Because as parents, that's the thing. We want to give them the skills to be able to develop into these healthy, kind of thriving adults. So, what one piece of advice would you like to leave parents listening to help them feel less alone on this ADHD journey?
I would say if you've got suspicions about your child and you think that there's something going on, but you just don't know quite what, I would make a journal, and write down observations or incidents, certain situations where you've seen your child do something or say something which you think perhaps isn't typical of a child in their age. And I appreciate every child is different. But I think having this information somehow captured is so helpful so you can look back and review. And also, if it does come to the point where you're going to seek a diagnosis, you have a history of events that you're ready to share. I think that would be one thing. And also, get support for yourself to try and help you figure out what's going on, how to do this, what steps you need to take. And whether that's through friends who may be going through something similar, or speaking to a GP, speaking to a teacher, or the SEN department of your school if they have one. Um, and also be compassionate, both to yourself and to your child. Be forgiving. Don't beat yourself up. Take lots of deep breaths. It is an exhausting journey. So don't beat yourself up. Um, and if you feel that you're being surrounded by people, and I've been there, who you feel are judging you because they think this is just bad parenting and it's a naughty child, try to either bite your tongue or stand up for yourself or walk away. Don't feel bad. Don't let them make you feel bad. And I really hope that you don't feel that you are being judged because your children are supposedly out of control, which I've had said to me so many times. Just try and take a deep breath and walk away from the situation, and just know that you're trying your best, and you're going to try and maybe do something about it if you feel you need to. At the end of the day, these little children are amazing. They're so unbelievably unique and special. And just be proud of their little achievements, their brilliant achievements, no matter how small they are. and just make them feel special.
Oh, they are amazing and they are special, and it's quite an emotional journey to be on, and I think we really have to remember those moments. Sometimes even just saying it out loud is quite emotional. I can hear that in you too, and I recognise that so much. So Han, thank you so much for sharing your story today. It has been so special for me personally, obviously as one of my very best friends, to have this conversation. And I know that your honesty will help so many others feel less alone, as you've helped me. You know, you came and joined my journey maybe a year or so into this, and actually I and my children have always felt so at home with you and your children. There is just so much comfort. That makes me feel emotional. There's so much comfort and safety in just acceptance and seeing something that you recognise so deeply reflected back at you in a safe and accepting way. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, thank you, Claire. It's been a joy, and it's almost been like, and I am getting emotional. It's almost been like therapy talking about it, because it's just really nice to talk it all through and just look back and reflect on the journey and what you've been through. But yeah, they are amazing children, and yeah, we just need to celebrate each and every one of them.
We do, which is what this podcast is all about. And thank you so much for sharing your story. It has been very special to chat with you today. I know your honesty will help parents listening feel less alone, and you've certainly helped me feel less alone. Thank you. If you'd like to learn more about Hannah's interior design work, or you'd like to check out her beautiful Hampton House home, then please do head to our show notes below for links along with more information. And if you enjoyed this podcast and found it helpful, please can you follow and review All Aboard to help other parents find this podcast and welcome them aboard our journey too. Thank you for listening to All Aboard.